I flipped the league pyramid in England upside down. All the stars in the Premier League now find themselves in the 5th tier Vanarama National League. And the current teams in the National League are in the promised land of the Prem, although 4 of them are in the Championship along with 20 of the League 2 teams. The maths of 20 teams from the Prem and switching that with 24 in the National League, it gets a bit tricky, with the teams in the Championship being down in League 2. League 1 stays the same though. So who will get back to the Premier League first? And which national side thrives in the Prem? How many of the world's best players from the Prem stick around in the lower leagues? Because there's only 2 promotions in the Vanarama National League, which means it will take a minimum of 10 seasons for all of the current Premier League sides to get promoted from the Vanarama National League. 10 years. But after simulating 1 season, Solihull Moors have won the Premier League, some team that I did not expect. Langstaff got the most goals for Notts County, I'm not too surprised either, but who has done well in the Champions League? I say that because even though the Premier League teams are in the National League now, they are still qualified for the Champions League, and we can see each one of them have actually got themselves promoted from their group stage despite being in the 5th tier of English football. But none of them could get to the final, which means none of them play Champions League football next year. They won't be in Europe at all. The farthest that anybody got was Manchester City, who got to the semi-final. Joining the Vanarama national teams in the Premier League next year are Grimsby, Carlisle and Bradford, who got themselves promoted from the Championship as the League 2 teams. League 1 was of course the only league that didn't actually change, and Peterborough were the champions, with Ipswich and Derby also getting promoted. But in League 2 we have Burnley, who finished as champions, going up now into League 1, but Blackburn, QPR and Stoke all got themselves promoted. But look at this, Middlesbrough have qualified for the Europa Conference League. We'll take a look at that in a sec. But before we do, everybody's probably curious who got promoted the first time in the Vanarama National League, and that was Liverpool and Chelsea. Liverpool finished as champions, only losing 2 games to Everton and Manchester City, who finished second but still didn't gain promotion. Only the top team go up automatically. The other 6, I believe, go through a playoff scheme, and Chelsea were victorious as they got to the playoff. They beat Arsenal in the final 3-1. Some players have already departed the Vanarama national team, like Declan Rice, Martin Odegaard, Saliba. Quite a lot of Arsenal's team have actually left, and they've sold them for quite a lot of money as well to some of Europe's biggest clubs, the clubs that you would expect, the likes of Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, for instance. Manchester City also selling a couple of their players that we can see, but not their main man. Of course, Erling Haaland and Kevin De Bruyne, they are still at the club. Both of them still playing. Erling Haaland would always been a little bit more difficult because he has just signed, but I am still shocked to see the amount of players that are still playing in the Vanarama National League and will still be playing next year. Even the likes of Evan Ferguson have already been snapped up by PSG and stuck in their under-19s. They're not the only ones who have departed the Vanarama National League. A lot of managers have also been sacked, as it would have been in the Premier League. Newcastle replacing Eddie Howe because they lost confidence from the playing staff. 3 out of the 4 championship teams that went down to the Vanarama National to replace the 4 which needed to go up, Norwich, West Brom and Sheffield United, all replaced their managers, probably because obviously they were playing with Premier League sides. Brentford, Manchester United, Wolves, West Ham, Southampton and Leeds all replaced their managers this season as well, with the likes of Giovanni van Bronckhorst coming in for Leeds and Ruud van Nistelrooy coming in for Manchester United, possibly a peek into the future. The FA Cup was still won by Chelsea, who defeated Manchester City 2-0 in the final, but as we've probably seen already, Middlesbrough won the Carabao Cup because none of the Premier League teams could enter. This is the League Cup. You have to be in minimum of League 2 to win it. Middlesbrough beat QPR in the final. In the second year of this experiment, Bradford City are Premier League champions. Of course, they used to be in the Premier League, so that's quite interesting. They've also been promoted last season and won the Premier League in the first time of asking, which is obviously very impressive as well, and probably impossible to do in this day and age. But despite having all of the Premier League money, the most that any club spent in the Premier League was £4.4 million, which was Grimsby, who bought Ben Johnson from West Ham. If you take a look at that in consideration, where they finished? In second place, which is getting them Champions League football next year. In the Championship, we had a very similar scenario in that a newly promoted team won the league in Derby. But in fact, the other two clubs that got themselves promoted in Peterborough and Ipswich finished in second and third, and both got promoted as well. You might start recognising a pattern here because Blackburn and Burnley also got themselves promoted from Sky Bet League One after winning the league and obviously getting promoted last year. But Plymouth are the surprising team to go up through the playoffs. They finished mid-table last season, but they've won the playoff promotion this time round at Wembley, which I couldn't be happy with being from the place. But a couple of the clubs that did come up obviously did not get themselves promoted. The likes of QPR there, and Sheffield Wednesday is a big club still down in Sky Bet League One and are missing this massive opportunity of getting to the Premier League before the big boys get there. It's probably not surprising to you that Chelsea are the Sky Bet League 2 champions. They only lost one game all season, that was away to Cardiff, and Liverpool got themselves promoted as well. So the two clubs that came up from the Vanarama National League in the first season, both going up yet again. Sunderland and Coventry are finally joining them, and once again we have a Europa Conference League winner from Sky Bet League 2. Sutton and Harrogate are going down to the Vanarama National League. That's unfortunate. They're in there with some big boys now. Two clubs that they won't be rubbing shoulders with is Manchester City and Newcastle, who were the promoted clubs this season. Man City going up as champions, only losing 2 games. Manchester United finished in second place, but they lost in the playoff final against Newcastle 1-0. So that's unfortunate for Manchester United. But if we take a look down the bottom here, 10 points have been deducted from both Bournemouth and Wolves for going into administration. Obviously, the downside of going from the Premier League to the Vanarama National League is the money that you are spending on wages is not covered by the winnings that you're getting from being in the Premier League. A very lucrative league, and that's cost them 10 points for each club, but they still managed to finish mid-table. Although you would never guess that some of these clubs are in the Vanarama National League because they are still spending loads, and there's a reason why Wolves was probably in administration when they spent £63 million on Mateus Cunha from Atletico Madrid, making that deal permanent. We are seeing here that there are quite a few deals that have gone through where players have left. Arsenal, once again, Martinelli and Gabriel Jesus, but some of the money that is being spent by these Premier League clubs in the Vanarama National League obviously are from deals that are already done, but some of them, we're looking at this one here, James Maddison going from Leicester to Manchester City, £23 million. You're never going to earn that much money in the Vanarama National League, so Manchester City better hope that it carries them all the way up into the Premier League very soon. Nathan Patterson, Arsenal probably can afford it because they've sold so many of their players. They probably have a bit of spare cash going around, but still, a lot of these players are still around the Manchester City, Manchester United that are still in this league, and even the managers too. Pep Guardiola is still manager of Manchester City. He is stuck around, and if we take a look at the management movement, there wasn't a lot considering there was a lot of Premier League clubs still in here. Crystal Palace were the only original Premier League side down in this league now who sacked their manager, Patrick Vieira, obviously who's lost his job recently in real life. For anyone interested on how the English clubs got on in the Champions League, only one team in the Champions League group stage picked up any points. That was Wrexham. They got themselves a 0-0 draw at home to Marseille. Notts County there with 0 points, minus 19 goal difference. We have Gateshead, 0 points, minus 14 goal difference. And Solihull Moors, Premier League champions, minus 14 goal difference with 0 points. But after Champions League football, Gateshead were then relegated as bottom of the Premier League the following season in 20th there. The winners was Derby, back-to-back promotions and then Premier League winners. I guess in this league they are probably the biggest club in the competition now with the likes of Bradford. Maybe that's probably the only club who in stature, and Ipswich, would be rivaling the size of the club Derby County is. And still the money going in the Premier League is probably more than the money going out of it, because the likes of Manchester City buying Ipswich's players from the Premier League to take them down into League 2 is quite hilarious when they're spending £53 million. Bradford are spending a little bit of money, as is Peterborough, bringing the likes of Tariq Lamptey and Ivan Toney up into the league, as well as Ipswich buying Cole Palmer there from Manchester City. So a lot of these clubs are buying players from the lower leagues. I think it's going to be quite funny to see how the dynamic of when these clubs start to meet these teams back in the Premier League. But Burnley and Blackburn managed to get themselves back into the Premier League. Of course, they would have started in the Championship and probably have done this a few seasons back. Plymouth are in third place, but they did not get themselves promoted from the playoffs because AFC Wimbledon managed to snatch that. We are seeing the likes of Boreham Wood get themselves relegated now after their time in the Premier League, not being able to survive even in the Championship. But coming up into the Championship next season is a couple of familiar faces. It's Liverpool and Chelsea. Liverpool finished as champions. Chelsea there in second place, along with Stoke, obviously former Championship club. We're not seeing anybody else from the Vanarama National to start off with stick around because the likes of Maidstone and Maidenhead are already getting themselves relegated back down into League 2. In League 2, obviously that's where Manchester City are. They finish in second place to Newcastle, who finished with only one loss, which was to Manchester City as champions. Middlesbrough and Swansea from the Championship originally get themselves promoted into League 1 alongside those two big Premier League clubs. Now, the crossover is going to start happening quite often, so if I do miss some of these clubs who are going to be going from the Vanarama National League, from the Premier League all the way back down, I do apologise. It's going to be really difficult to follow, but we're seeing a lot of familiar names. Erling Haaland and Alexander Isak is still in the Premier League clubs. They have not moved, which is rather interesting. I'm finding that quite fascinating. In the Vanarama National League, though, Manchester United are the club who finished as champions, and Brighton, who actually finished in second, did get themselves promoted through the playoffs. Arsenal are still in there, so if we're looking at probably the bigger clubs, the top six, as people say, Tottenham and Arsenal are the two that still haven't got themselves promoted. And we're even seeing clubs like West Brom getting relegated from this division, when clubs like Sutton and Fylde are still in this division, and they've actually managed to bump West Brom down. So they've managed to survive, a lot of these clubs still in the Vanarama National League, still with a lot of their players as well. Only time will tell if they can get themselves pulled out of that league. Still, every single season, the FA Cup is being won by a former Premier League side, this season being Liverpool. I did notice a couple of seasons ago, Chelsea won it, which means they would have qualified for Europa League, and they actually won the Europa League last year, which means they are in the Champions League this season. Did they manage to win it? No, they got themselves to the final though, despite still being in the lower leagues of England. They lost only after extra time to Bayern Munich. The other English sides in this competition didn't do as well. If we take a look down here, we've got Bradford City, FC Halifax, and Grimsby there in 25th, with Carlisle in 29th. So none of them actually managed to qualify for the knockout stages, but Chelsea did. I'll quickly scan through the fourth season because this is when it starts to get interesting. This is the final season before any of the Premier League sides can actually get back to the Premier League, and Derby are champions once again. So our first back-to-back on 87 points. Burnley, who managed to pull themselves up there in second place on 82 points, and we're seeing some familiar names in the Champions League once again. But if you take a look at some of the player statistics, you'll recognise some very familiar faces. The likes of Callum Owendu is a very good wonder kid on the game. Ivan Toney is there. Michael Elise for FC Halifax. But as I say, it's the final time for them to shine because Chelsea and Liverpool are going up with Plymouth Argyle. Oh yes, I'm very happy with that. But that's very interesting. Those are the two first Premier League sides that can get back into the Premier League, and they have done that the first time of asking. They probably haven't suffered too much. The season, the league below, Newcastle and Man City, it seems like it's just a ladder, and as soon as they get to that point, they're absolutely fine. They just can only filter through two at a time because of the promotion from Vanarama National League. Down in League 2, is it the same story? Yes, Manchester United and Brighton are the two going up. Maidenhead managed to survive this time round after going down the season before. Not bad whatsoever, but the two that got themselves promoted this year is West Ham and Everton. Still no Arsenal. I know, it's quite surprising to me that still Arsenal have not managed to get themselves there, and Mikel Arteta is still there. If you take a look at a lot of the players, they're still the same players that they had there, and they've brought in some more as well. This time round, though, in the Champions League, a couple of impressive performances from both Derby and Peterborough and FC Halifax, all managing to get themselves enough points to actually qualify to the knockout stage. They'll have to play the first round playoff. Carlisle did get 7 points, but it wasn't enough for them to go through. So we are seeing progression there from the relegated sides, or the Vanarama National sides, who managed to get themselves to the Premier League. But did they make it any further? Well, unfortunately, FC Halifax are knocked out by Napoli. Derby got themselves through against Leipzig on penalties. Peterborough got knocked out by Monaco. So Derby went through to the round of 16, but it's as far as they got. start, they were eliminated by Atletico Madrid, who went on and beat Real Madrid in the final. What a final that was, 1-0. We are also seeing the Vanarama national sides and obviously a couple of the other teams start to flex their wallets in the Premier League now. The likes of Peterborough spending quite a lot of money. Wrexham have been in the league since the very beginning of this experiment. They're spending hell of a lot of money. £30 million there, another £29 million there. FC Halifax are buying wonder kids like Samuel Ricci and Callum Moendu and Sulemana. We're seeing the reputation start to increase as well to a 2.5 star there for Halifax. Wrexham have increased up into another 2.5 star as well. Peterborough, who have been playing Champions League football, at 3 star. Solihull Moors is exactly the same. All of these clubs are now reaping the benefits from it, and it's going to come to a point where we're going to butt heads with other Premier League sides who have lost reputation. It's going to be really interesting to find out what happens. 5 seasons later, and Bournemouth are the first Premier League side to be relegated from the Vanarama National League. They were also deducted 10 points again because of administration, meaning that they would have survived if it wasn't for that administration money problems. But Wolves and Tottenham are the next 2 clubs to get themselves promoted. We'll go in the other way this time round. Let's take a look at the Sky Bet League 2. Everton and West Ham again jump up the ladder. They're the next 2 clubs to get themselves promoted into League 1. Speaking of which, we can see Manchester United are the champions. Brighton are 3rd place and going up through the playoffs, and Swansea are joining them in the championship as well. We're starting to see the likes of Forest Green and Crawley, York, some of the Vanarama National League clubs starting to get themselves relegated back down towards where they were supposed to be starting. And in the championship, Manchester City and Newcastle are straight getting themselves promoted back into the Premier League. Manchester City doing it without even losing a game in the championship. The hardest league possible, going without being in any of the top divisions for 4 years, and they still go and do it unbeaten. Quite impressive. Matisse Tell, obviously a new signing, getting 18 goals this season, with Ruben Neves also at the club. The likes of St. Maxime have had a great year at Newcastle. Stoke did get to 3rd place but lost in the playoffs to MK Dons, their first time in the Premier League. Speaking of which, Chelsea and Liverpool, from the very bottom of the Vanarama National League all the way to the top, Chelsea have won the Premier League in the first time of asking. They are the first club to do it since the flip, and Liverpool were right behind them in 2nd place. I say right behind them, they were still 8 points behind Chelsea, who only still lost 3 games. Very impressive considering it was their first season back. Derby, who have won back-to-back seasons, could only finish in 3rd place, and Ipswich down in 4th. Wrexham, I'd say, are probably the most consistent club out of the Vanarama National League teams that have been promoted. Well, that obviously were starting in the Premier League. They've done quite well every single season, as well as FC Halifax. The 2 clubs that I would probably say, since the start of this experiment, have done really well, just like Plymouth did in 9th place. Out of all of the English sides, though, only Derby and Grimsby and Burnley got through to the knockout playoff round in Europe of, well, the Champions League anyway, and none of them managed to progress into the actual knockout stages in the round of 16, which probably means that coefficient points for England have dropped down drastically, just in time for the likes of Chelsea to try and rescue it again. Speaking of which, Chelsea have probably been the unsung heroes of this save for England, because they've also won the Europa League this season, despite obviously not being in the Premier League last season, managing to qualify through a cup. Graham Potter doing exceedingly well considering how bad he's been doing in real life, and they've pretty much got the exact same team that starts off the game, with the likes of Kai Havertz, 180 current ability, Wesley Fofana, Reece James, Mason Mount, Kovacevic. All of these fantastic players that they have in the Premier League, they still got now that they're back on top as well. I'm actually going to jump another 10 years into the future, and that's when we'll next reconvene to see what has happened in all of that time. But if you can, please subscribe. I really do appreciate it for more experiments just like these. So after simulating another 10 seasons, we're about 15 years into the future, and Bournemouth are the only Premier League side still in the Vanarama National League. Some big sides are in the league though. The likes of Sheffield United are still here and haven't been promoted. since their relegation. Nottingham Forest have only just gone up as champions, as has Crystal Palace about 3 or 4 years ago, so they're the two stragglers there that manages to pull themselves out. But if we go to League 2, you can still see some remnants of what has been happening because of the flip. Southampton being relegated back down into the Vanarama National League. We can still see the likes of Nottingham Forest there. And if we go a little bit further up, we're going to see some more teams who haven't quite made it back to the Premier League. This is where majority of the teams are going to be laying within League 1 and the Championship. In League 1, in fact, we can only see Fulham down there in 5th place. The rest of the teams have obviously managed to progress through. Gateshead, after their crash down the leagues, they're now relegated into Sky Bet League 2. But in the Championship, Carlisle had just been promoted against Wrexham on penalties in the playoffs, so Wrexham did end up going down, as did Carlisle. We can see Brighton going up as champions and Plymouth Argyle going back to the Premier League on 87 points there. But we can see some big Premier League sides, the likes of Aston Villa, West Ham, Wolves, Leicester, Leeds, Arsenal. Arsenal are still in the Championship, and if we take a look at their side, Emile Smith-Rowe is the manager. He was a player and then he was a manager, and in fact he actually left Arsenal after a while and went around the block, but he did end up playing not only in Real Madrid, but then he was a manager at Salford and Wolves, and within 2 years found himself in the Arsenal job, which is quite impressive really, so early on in his managerial career. Arsenal are 19th in the Championship though. They are not going up. They don't even look anywhere close. Let's go up into the Premier League though, the promised land. Who is up there? Well, Liverpool are champions, and since Liverpool and Man City got themselves promoted, and since Chelsea obviously won the first Premier League title, it's only been those 3 teams that have managed to win the Premier League. Manchester United have climbed all the way back up there in 5th place there in the Champions League, but Derby are the only team that has managed to hold on. Actually, that's a lie. FC Halifax are another team that's managed to hold on. So I would probably say the likes of FC Halifax, Derby, and then probably Grimsby are the 3 teams that have benefited the most from this flip. And 15 years later, they're still doing really well. Tottenham managed to pull themselves back into the Premier League and make themselves a mid-table Premier League side. Notts County, they've only just been relegated. MK Dons are now relegated after their stint in the Premier League, and Brentford, after getting all the way back up to the top, starting to go back down. What I did find quite interesting was, since the league has been flipped, there hasn't even been one English side to have won the Champions League. Not even from the Vanarama National League that has managed to bring themselves back to the Premier League. The originals, not one. This has also affected the league. We can see in the competition reputation that the English Premier League was actually down in 2nd place in 2032, but managed to climb back up into 1st position, obviously when the former sides of the Premier League managed to get themselves back to the top. And it also affected the club reputation. We mentioned about some of the sides in the Premier League gaining reputation, but a lot of them have lost it too, and Manchester City and Liverpool are the 2 highest in England now. We can see they're some way off Barcelona, Bayern and PSG at the top. Somebody who has climbed though is Derby. They find themselves there in the top 20-25 teams in the world now, with a 4-star continental reputation. And the final thing we're going to look at today, the FA Cup. Derby are the current champions. They've won it back-to-back years. We've had Bradford City win it recently, FC Halifax in 2030-31. So it's nice that some of these clubs who have been flipped into the Premier League have stuck on and still won the FA Cup. I hope you really enjoyed this experiment. Let me know if you want to see more down in the comment section. Make sure you're subscribed so you do not miss the next one, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.